So in video games, we often fear the power of a large company, right? But this is one example. It proves that there's hope. Especially nowadays, in 2023, everyone loves a story that is fundamentally about corporate hubris and how the community comes back and kicks the shit out of them. Community pushback over fear of monetization, in this case, and a company seemingly, at least from a principled level, trying to close a vice grip around their IP, their community, their product, just to squeeze more money out of it. That resulted in a company running everything back, and in a way that opened, I guess you could call it, a Pandora's box. Just like you should open the link below for today's sponsor.
Brilliant. They are the best way to improve your prospects and develop yourself, especially in lucrative fields. And it's all via their fantastic site and app, where the first 200 to click my link get 20% off. Now, compared to how I learned computer science in university, their approach is so much more approachable. It's fun and interactive. I mean, somehow I actually never even touched Python in my CS degree. So in my spare time, I've been slowly making my way through their Python course. And even at the basic level, it was just neat seeing how they were teaching things that I was already sort of familiar with, but so much better compared to the more traditional way that I learned them. Actually a lot more intuitive and fun. And of course, by having the code just run in your browser, they do ensure that no setup related issues get in your way. It's such a refreshing approach, honestly. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've got so many gaps in my knowledge, and I kind of feel like I'm getting rusty, you know? Falling off the wagon a bit, not really being a lifelong learner in the way that I should. Too busy to develop myself. And I regret that, but Brilliant has got me learning again. Things are approachable, bite-sized, and with their approach, you're not just sponging facts in. No, you actually have topics click, because you're learning by doing. Now, if you're thinking about your career, well, I'd say they're the best way to get started in a lot of those high-paying fields like AI and computer science, rather than the way that I did it with a boring old textbook. So, I love what they do. I think they've got an awesome mission as a company, and whether you want to learn for yourself or maybe spark a younger mind's journey, visit brilliant.org/Bellular News today, and the first 200 to click will get 20% off their annual subscription.
D&D, it's massive, it's a cultural touchstone, it's getting bigger than ever, but now people are kind of getting worried because Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, who own D&D, are starting to act out in ways that anyone watching this video will find, let's say, unfortunately familiar. So over in Magic the Gathering, which they also own, they recently made, let's say, a product that isn't exactly for you and I, largely speaking. It was a $999 reprint of the Black Lotus card, a product that cost them almost nothing, you know. All you do is print it. Maybe you design something nice, you design the packaging, but there you go. It's a very high product margin. It's just pure money. You might call it wheeling in a way. It's them just trying to get as much money as humanly possible out of a product with, I guess, minimal effort. It's cashing in on the culture, cashing in on the idea that this card is important to Magic players. At the same time, it's not just wheeling they're doing for the massive one-off things. They also introduced 30 plus new products into the Magic ecosystem. And that's a game where you have to stick on top of the meta. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in Hearthstone as well, where you see, why are there so many new sets? Why are there so many new cards? Why is everything coming all the time? And it's clearly the answer is they're trying to get more money. And that comes from Wizards, right? Wizards of the Coast. Wizards was downgraded by a Bank of America analyst for saying that they've been ruining Magic by overprinting and things like that. So obviously in a corporation, your stock's downgraded. That's everyone involved, stakeholders. They're going to be angry. They're going to be furious. They're going to want to pull that back up. So the president goes and says, D&D, you know, our brand is really under monetized. And I know if you imagine any video game, any game you play, any live service thing, if you hear under monetized, you know exactly what comes next, don't you? Everyone knows it's, oh, right, just time to squeeze. It's time to squeeze. It's time to get to the point of, oh, you've made a good product and we've all enjoyed it, and now you're going to ruin it in the name of money. What a surprise. Though there is something to be said for D&D actually being literally under monetized, because there's a few issues, right? There's only like 9 set releases last year, so that's not an awful lot. But one of the problems is that DMs, the Dungeon Masters, they're the ones who buy the official products, but they're only 20% of the player base. It's almost like, if you remember back in the DS, you could share games if someone had a copy of, I think it was Mario Kart 6 or 7, whichever one it was, and then you could play that with people who didn't have a copy. That's what it was like, and you can immediately see the problem there. You can immediately see how that ends up going, well, why are 4 people getting to play one video game? We should be selling 4 video games. And that's ultimately the problem of why it's under monetized. Another part is that if you think of a D&D game, right? Obviously, the DM buys the official stuff, maybe splits the cost of people, but then people do snack runs. People go do beer runs. People will have like nice premium dice or prints or anything, but that'll be stuff they've got from Etsy. That's stuff that Wizards of the Coast don't get any money from. And that's where they're starting to go, we need more money. And obviously that sounds horrible. They have some of that coming in with D&D Beyond, which is their digital character platform. And obviously you're here because of video games. Digital platforms. Don't you love subscriptions? Don't you love little bits of extra? Oh yeah, pay $1 a month for this. Pay $5 to get access to this. So that's going to be like how they expand things. Seemingly in this effort, they took a step that engaged what I can only describe as almost like a community level apocalyptic drama. Before I go any further, I should say, we're not lawyers. We're using some common sense, we're using our own reading on things, but when it comes to like the legalese of legal documents, which we're about to get into, a lot of this comes from Linda Kudega at Gizmodo. They have the access to the leaks that they couldn't show because it would put their sources in danger. They have sources and they have both major editorial and legal oversight. So generally, people are largely confident in what they have to say. So for full context, Wizards' open game license was this document that more or less said, as long as you don't use like any of our literal IP, you can make expansions to D&D, you can make whatever, and that's perfectly fine. It's all about the idea of, hey, we're making this an open platform for people to collaborate on, and you can see how that's worked. D&D is like the known thing. Everyone knows of Critical Role or something vaguely similar. The idea of, oh yeah, that's a really cool baseline you've built. Let's expand upon that using the same systems. And that was the original idea. Obviously, you can imagine, right? A company looks at that in the modern realm and goes, hang on, you're saying you get to use our work for free? That doesn't sound very fair on us, right? So you can kind of see where they come from when they want to change it. But it's a cultural touchstone. It's a community-led effort. You don't want to mess with it. But that's exactly what they did, right? Wizards decided to change the OGL, this is for the community thing, and for a couple of good reasons, right? It's out of date. It was from 1989. It's not a good legal document at all, which we'll get into a little bit later. Basically, it offers them a substantial amount of liabilities. But that's not how everybody sees it, right? To get the story right, in December, they got around 20 or so of their biggest third-party creators in to look at the new version of the license. Two things. One, under NDA, so they couldn't say jack to anyone else. And also, they offered them special deals to agree. And this is from Gizmodo's sources, allegedly. They were given things like a 15% royalty split instead of a 25% royalty split, which is what they intended to add in the OGL that we now know. You know, people can't speak out. They see this new OGL. Sure, that's fine, normal corporate stuff. But it's not just corporate. People see these and people go, oh, this is changing. And obviously, people talk. Things started to leak, not the full document, just ideas, just, hey, so I heard on the grapevine that, you know, the thing that's given us freedom and is the backbone of all of the community creation, the backbone of this incredible cultural landmass that is D&D. Yeah, the OGL, it seems like it might be going away. And that was a little bit of the fear, right? And that's where you see a lot of pushback immediately start to go. Everyone goes, oh shit, are we in trouble? And then Wizards turn around and say, hey, it's changing because we want to stop things like D&D NFTs. No one likes NFTs. So obviously they say that they're going to have people on side, or so they thought. And they also said they don't want large companies to be exploiting their IP, which is literally a fair point. But, you know, whenever they're the large company that starts to be doing what people perceive as bullying, then you can kind of see where they're going to be. It's hard to have empathy for someone that's doing the bullying, realistically. That's for sure. They went on to say that the OGL only applies to like things like print and PDFs, so, you know, actual tabletop adventures, things like podcasts, art, games, virtual tabletops, anything that's like fan content is under the 2017 fan content policy, which is pretty open and allows more or less anything. Nothing would be jeopardized by this, except for the actual tabletop adventures. But that's not how people felt it, especially because they then said anything that's non-commercial has to be available for free. So say if you wrote a D&D adventure under this proposed OGL draft, you couldn't put it on Patreon to your Patreon supporters or behind like a subwall on YouTube or anything, or even sell it. It would have to be free. Unless you do sell it and it's commercial work, then you have to report everything that you earn, everything you do to Wizards, and above $750,000 a year revenue, you'll pay a revenue-based royalty. Now that's revenue-based and not profit, which in the context of large companies you have to think about, because basically losing 25%, and that's what they say, 25%, losing 25% of your revenue means that you have to be super, super cost efficient, because if you're not making more than 25% of that as profit, then you're going to have to figure something else out, which ultimately works as Wizards very carefully putting a cap on what people can earn. It's, oh, you're using a spin-off of our product? Well, you can't get bigger than us, because then we'll start siphoning off your money. And that means people aren't going to want to grow beyond 750,000 revenue, because it gets harder and harder after that. It's basically diminishing returns in the more mathematical sense. That's what they were intending to artificially apply. And that's what Gizmodo got from the OGL. They've had legal people look at it, and ultimately they say Wizards in every sense are overreaching, but especially with two specific areas. One is there are rights that will protect Wizards under the OGL if something is being produced that's similar. So, as an example, say you're making an adventure. Let's say it's some fantastic sci-fi with very specific themes, very specific ideas, and very specific aesthetics. Maybe even you're writing like a cyberpunk adventure. And then Wizards, they say, oh, we were making one of those. Well, we're now safe. We can release it. And because they're bigger, they could arguably bully you out of the market. Or, and this is what people were worried about, people are worried that they could see something that was going to be popular and then using their greater resources, immediately greenlight a competitor, get the competitor done likely quicker, maybe to similar kind of quality, using the existing ideas, and then say, oh, hey, this license protects us. So we're actually allowed to essentially push ourselves into your market. And this, as soon as you hear this, you can kind of understand the problem, right? The ability to use OGL produced material for any purposes they decide on, but which others would retain ownership over. That is to say, you will still own the thing you make, but they'll be able to do whatever they want with it. Theoretically, they will be able to sell it. Most of their wording was about marketing and using it for purposes like that, but it was very much a clause that says, if you make something using this license, we can use it in any way we want, outside of literally owning it. That goes very, very far, and literal ownership, despite being that licensed, doesn't awfully mean a lot in the end. And of course, they had logic for this, right? Wizards were then saying that the open game license was always intended to allow the community to help grow D&D and expand it creatively. It wasn't intended to subsidize major competitors, which, when you look at a little bit of how Paizo grew with Pathfinder, where you look at a little bit of how some of the fan works, obviously the fan works are still under the fan content policy, but you can see a case of Wizards saying, hang on, this is ours. Why are other people making, maybe not more money, but why are other people making so much money off this? And we're not getting any of it. That was kind of ours. So this all kind of happened over the beginning of January when Gizmodo published their article on the January 5th. And then Wizards didn't really have the time to respond properly. They did respond a couple days later saying, hey, we're working on a full response. But this is, we've all been there, right? When you don't get a response out in time, that leaves everyone to, I guess the correct way to describe it would be to stew in their own juices. It gives the community a lot of times to think of the worst things that could possibly happen, then to believe that the worst things that will possibly happen will happen. And from the start of this video, what they're doing with Magic, you can understand why people would genuinely be afraid. If you were in a creative work, if you were in something that was like, I guess the closest example of video games would be modding, right? If you were having a good ass time modding, say, Skyrim stuff, and being like Patreon supported for it, like I know Skyrim Together was, that went a wee bit south, or basically, in any modding context, and then the company who owns the game, so in this case Bethesda, would turn around and go, hey, you're doing an awful lot of work, we're not getting any money from this, you're getting paid, where's our money? And then muscle in. Everyone would be afraid, so you can see why this is happening exactly here. It took a long time to get a reply out, and in the meantime, things went crazy. Now imagine you're working on this OGL stuff, you're working at Wizards, and you see an open letter with over 66,000 signatures, and the gist of it is Wizards of the Coast wants to dismantle the tabletop industry. Yeah, that's how serious people were taking this. This was a existential threat to the entire industry that people wanted. So in response, you immediately have competition come out of the woodwork. There's Cobalt Press, and they say, we're making, this is funny, they say, codename Project Black Flag. We're going to make a competitor, and we're going to make sure people can use it. Obviously, Black Flag, piracy, that's them literally saying, well, this doesn't belong to you. It belongs to us, the people, getaway company, we'll do our own. And that was one. Paizo then, who make Pathfinder, exploded out of the gate saying, we're making the open RPG creative license, we're making it system agnostic, we're going to pay for all that to happen, and we're going to hand it to a non-profit. So then when the non-profit has control of it, there will never be a profit incentive for this to be taken over. There will never be anyone who gets to come in and say, this tabletop community isn't making enough money for us, we'll take control of it. And that's pretty intense. There was tons of pushback against Wizards. Gizmodo said something like 5 figures in terms of tickets to Wizards customer support stuff about cancelling D&D Beyond accounts. cancelling book orders, selling off books that they already bought at a loss just to get rid of them, filing complaints to the phone line, stuff like that. And all of this is despite a lot of people believing that the legal changes don't actually matter. Some do, and some were preparing defenses for it, but fundamentally it was more of a principle, right? And you can, if you've been following on, you'll understand. The principle is Wizards got too big for their boots and said, hey, this is ours. And it literally is. They literally own D&D. But that's not what the principle says about how everyone else has been there. It's the thing I often talk about in video games when it comes to sequels or remasters and things like that, especially sequels that take a while. Who actually owns this? Do the legal owners own it? Obviously, yes. But in a principled sense, does this belong to the community more than it does to the developer? Does this belong to the people who, dare I say it, love it more, put more effort into it, care for it more? It's almost like an IP equivalent of squatters' rights. Does it belong more to the people who put all the hard work in and kept it up and sort of gave it the love that it wasn't getting from its actual owner? Obviously, there's no legal standpoint for that to work, but this is the principal idea, and this is why everyone was furious. This is why this has been an ongoing drama throughout the entirety of January, is because people saw a company step in and go, this is our IP, you're having too much fun with it, give us your money, and we all know how that went. But thankfully, actually, this pushback, as I said at the start of the video, actually worked in a moment that I can only describe as a beam of light shining through like the broken dark clouds, as something that I hope the video game industry could look across because obviously this is across a small fence. It's a different industry, but it's very similar in terms of fandom. It's very similar in terms of some of the principles involved. Basically, Wizards of the Coast got the shit kicked out of them. They had to acquiesce on almost everything. They said they made a big statement, and they were saying things like, this was draft language. We see people aren't happy. Like they originally said, only tabletop content is offended. We're going to change the OGL, but the only affected things will be tabletop content in print and PDF. Whatever you're doing as fans, be that cosplay, be that, I guess the Critical Role shows, be that just podcasts, be that actual literal like physical plays, everything is fine. We won't touch any of that. Anything that was done under the original OGL will remain. Only anything new after this will be subject to the new OGL. Anything before will be fine. There's no royalty, as opposed to the original where they suggested in the draft they would take 25% of revenue, and that's a lot, above 750k. They went, no royalty. We're not going to get away with this, so they didn't. And that's wonderful news for any of the competition, and wonderful news for like the future of tabletop overall. If you base yourself off D&D rules, you'll be able to become a massive new thing. It means competition will happen, and Wizards no longer have this arbitrary ability to stifle competition. Even though you could argue it's not arbitrary, you could argue it's legally fine. It's not by the spirit. And the spirit of the law, the spirit of community, the spirit of the actual tabletop, industry, won here. And the last part is, they're actually removing the license back provision as well. So the part where your thing belongs to us, if you use our system, they're removing that entirely. They are going to add stuff that gives them protections from the examples of, say, defamation. So if Party X made an adventure using D&D systems that was all about, say, how Party Y, whoever they may be, is a animal botherer or some form of unreasonable statement to make with someone, some defamation, then theoretically Wizards could be sued because they're licensing that product and there's no way for them to get out of that. So they will have to update some of that. But generally speaking, they're going to not suggest that they have any rights at all to created content under the OGL. In the grand scheme of things, this is really insane. Like, we actually recorded, before this final news broke, we actually recorded a video that was something like 45 to 50 minutes long on us discussing basically everything about this, the original case, before they had the pushback. And it was so much of us just discussing how this is a very important thing, and all of the corporate incentives make sense on Wizards' end. The fact that they want to monetize more for their under-monetized product, that completely makes sense. It's just the way they've done it, the way they've attempted to do it here, was by treading on the community that they built with the original intent. So they essentially they planted a load of seeds, saw them grow, and as soon as they brought out the chainsaws and went, right, time to harvest this, the trees fought back, I guess, in this analogy. There's so much to talk about, but I think the important part at the end of the day is that the community was able to push back. The community was able to protect themselves. Certainly tactics that probably shouldn't be used, as there always is online, but fundamentally, everyone pushed back exactly as they should. And for Wizards, this is a terrible idea because they've opened Pandora's box. One thing that people have noticed is that under US copyright law, you cannot copyright rules, methods, or mechanics. from a video game perspective, thank God for that, because you can imagine how much of a hellscape we would live in if people could copyright things like good game mechanics. I know there's plenty of patents on like smaller things, but even then they're limited enough that you can't really talk about them too much. Versus imagine Activision using their legal weight to bully people into not being allowed to make first-person shooters like Call of Duty. That's one example. But you can't do that in the US. Copyright protects expression, whereas trademarks are about identifying one specific product from one person. And this was the idea of open game content, the mechanics of D&D. That's fine. So Wizards of this, by even taking this one slight step, or even this one threat, because it was a warning shot, right? It was a shot fired across the bow. It was, you're having too much fun, we're not making any money, we're going to come collect. But they might have absolutely destroyed themselves, because what people have realized is, as long as you don't use D&D names, you can do whatever you want. They may have opened themselves up to this incredible wealth of competition with obviously Paizo and their Pathfinder, with Cobalt Press and their Project Black Flag. They're the big examples, but this is a story of company hubris, something that I think in the games industry we're all very familiar with, and how community pushback could really put them back in their box while opening an entirely different sort of box, which is to say, even if you own IP, you don't own everything and you can be attacked. So hopefully you enjoyed our run through of this story. Fundamentally, Wizards made a big mistake by trying to think that they're stronger than the community. I really hope that we see something of this nature happen in video games sooner rather than later. It's about people sticking together in the sense of a fandom, in the sense of a community, in the sense of, as an example, if your DM boycotts, then everyone else will play a different game. There's competition there. So I think that's what we have to look forward to in video games. Us finally realizing that, I guess as consumer collectives, we actually have power against companies that are trying to exploit us. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back. Tomorrow we'll be discussing credits in video games and how a couple of little missteps from a couple developers could highlight an issue that will severely hurt the games industry, because we always have to be a little bit doom and gloom. Goodbye.